Good morning. I'm pleased to be here this morning with Lieutenant Governor Polito, Secretary of Transportation Tessler, Massachusetts Highway Safety Division Director Jeff Larson, AAA Northeast President and CEO John Galvin, and Mark Kremer to discuss the filing of an act relative to improving safety on the roads of the Commonwealth. Improving road safety across Massachusetts and updating our driving laws is a critical part of public safety, and our administration's partnered with the legislature in the past to enact several important reforms. For example, we were proud to sign the hands-free bill into law to crack down on distracted driving and added new work zone speed limits as part of the transportation bond bill. However, with more drivers returning to the roads, we need to build on these efforts to keep drivers safe. Over the past year, even with the decrease in driving during the pandemic, and maybe in part because of that, Massachusetts saw 334 roadway deaths, most of which were single-car accidents, and the primary cause in many cases was speed. This was almost even with the 336 deaths in 2019. We can certainly help prevent these traffic deaths, so today we're refiling several provisions and some new proposals to promote road safety. An act relative to improving safety on the roads of the Commonwealth includes a variety of provisions that are aimed at improving road safety for all commuters and updating our travel laws. The bill addresses all forms of travel: motorists, bicyclists, and pedestrians. Most importantly, it will keep residents of Massachusetts safe and ensure that fewer travelers are killed on our roads. The legislation includes important provisions to ensure that the rules of the road are followed, and strict consequences if they're not. It builds on Haley's Law, which now requires real-time electronic communication from the Registry of Motor Vehicles to local police departments when a driver in their community is suspended for a serious offense. Haley's Law was named in memory of Haley Kramer, who was tragically killed by a driver with a suspended sentence. Haley's father, Mark, has worked tirelessly to implement the initial Haley's Law, and we're honored to have him here today with us as we introduce provisions to strengthen that statute. He's been working hard with Representative Phillips to get the language in these new provisions passed over the last few years, and we look forward to working with our colleagues in the legislature to get them signed into law. When the law was passed in 2015, it required the registry to notify local law enforcement when a driver in their community has had their license suspended for serious offenses. Unfortunately, some people still get behind the wheel, and today we're introducing new penalties to hold individuals who drive with a suspended license accountable. Today we're pleased to file a new provision that has enhanced penalties for drivers who drive after their license has been suspended. Enhanced penalties will apply where a person with a suspended license drives recklessly, causes serious bodily injury, or causes death, with fines and potential jail time. Another important proposal in this bill will allow law enforcement to stop motorists for not wearing a seatbelt, putting us in line with the 34 other states that already have this law in the books. We're also refiling language around commercial driver's licenses, updating laws to make sure that only safe and qualified drivers are able to operate some of the largest vehicles on the road. We originally filed this language in July of 2019 after our review of Massachusetts regulation of commercial driver's licenses following the tragic death of 7 individuals in New Hampshire, and we determined a broader need to strengthen the laws that we had on the books regulating commercial driver's licenses. Other provisions we're filing and refiling include establishing an advisory working group to review the use of electric scooters and other devices, mandating that drivers use a safe passing distance of 3 feet when traveling around bicyclists and pedestrians, expanding crash reporting requirements to include more information so we can better understand what types of accidents are occurring and why, and requiring all Commonwealth-owned and operated vehicles over 10,000 pounds to have side guards, convex mirrors, and crossover mirrors, mirroring the requirements that are already in place in Boston and Cambridge. Our roadways are a fundamental part of the Commonwealth's infrastructure. They serve as the main artery for our daily travels and commerce, and it's critically important that we keep them as safe as we possibly can. This requires constant adjustments based on factors like new technology and changes in travel modes and behavior. It also requires us to evaluate public safety data and collaborate with our colleagues in local government to understand the biggest challenges that law enforcement and safety officials are observing each and every year. We believe this road safety package we're filing today addresses some of the most pressing issues that are facing commuters, and we are confident passing this bill will help reduce roadway deaths and injuries and improve our transportation system safety overall. And we look forward to working with our colleagues in the legislature to get this done. And with that, I want to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor to discuss some additional details.
Good morning. Thank you, Governor. I'm proud to be here today to continue building on the progress we began during the last legislative session in 2019, when our administration proposed several new bills to help save lives and prevent deaths on our roads. We are grateful to the legislature for working with us to enact these important provisions into law. And we thank you, John Galvin from AAA, and your team for your great work and your continued advocacy for the safety of the people in our Commonwealth and those who come through our Commonwealth. I just also want to say how honored I am to be here with Mark Kramer. I just want to say thank you for your continued advocacy, your hardship, turning it into action to make it better for other people in our Commonwealth. Your daughter, Haley, would be so proud of you, and we thank you. As the Governor said, this new safety legislation proposals would impact drivers, update some of our existing laws, keep up with the times to regulate things like electric scooters and electric bicycles, and give cities and towns an extra tool to stop drivers running red lights. I'd like to highlight a few of these details and just expand on some of the points the Governor made, in particular, the ones that will assist municipalities in this effort. First, the traffic camera enforcement local option will allow municipalities to place red light cameras at intersections to enforce red lights. This will allow communities to fine the registered owner of a car that runs a red light. The cameras would be restricted to collecting photographs only upon a violation and only of the vehicle license plate. The violations would include running a red light and making an illegal turn on a red light. It's been shown in studies that red light cameras, which are used in over 300 communities across our country today, have been instrumental in reducing dangerous accidents and roadway deaths. That data is very important to inform these provisions. Relative to CDLs, during the last legislative session, time ran out for the Transportation Committee to fully process the proposal relative to CDLs that the Governor mentioned. So we're including them again in this filing, and it would make sure that we are updating our laws and putting them in line with federal law to address statutory deficiencies we found during our review process. I'd like to talk a little about some of these new methods of mobility as we continue to move towards the reopening of the state post-COVID. We expect to see more micro-mobility devices like scooters. So far, cities and towns have been unable to move forward with these new modes of transportation. But with the growth in use and acceptance of things like scooters and bicycles, there's a lack of local regulation. This bill will call for Mass DOT to convene an advisory group to recommend a new statutory framework to ensure safe use while encouraging these low-carbon transportation alternatives. That'll be a good effort led by Mass DOT and some key experts in this area to help us and to work, obviously, in conjunction with our municipalities to approach this in a thoughtful manner and to ensure at the same time the safety of our roadways for all. This package of proposals will save lives, and we look forward to working with our elected leaders, both in the State House and in the state legislature, as well as with our municipal officials, to get these proposals vetted and reviewed and finally enacted into law. We couldn't do this without our external partners, and I want to name a number of groups that have worked really hard to get us to this point, but obviously recognize there's more work to do. The Vision Zero Coalition, Mass Bike, the Boston Bicyclists Union, Livable Streets, Walk Boston, AAA Northeast, Safe Roads Alliance, Students Against Drunk Driving, and Mothers Against Drunk Driving. We thank you all for your advocacy and turning your own personal stories into action to help others. And with that, I'd now like to turn it over to Secretary Tesler.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for your leadership on this important issue. I look forward to working to get these important provisions adopted and implemented. Becoming registrar after the tragic New Hampshire crash in 2019 that cost 7 lives was a moment of truth for me as to the importance of both strong laws and the effective implementation of those laws, but also the tragic impact one driver's decisions can have on so many other lives. As has been mentioned, it is a sad fact that the death toll due to tragic and avoidable crashes has continued nearly unabated throughout the pandemic, even with the reduced driving during the past year. The twin factors of speed and distracted driving continue to be contributing factors. This legislation will provide us with the additional tools to make our streets safer for all participants. Seatbelt use is a proven lifesaver. Massachusetts lags the nation in this most simple action. We need to be better, and primary enforcement is an effective tool in that effort. Haley's Law will ensure that those who act with such indifference to their fellow citizens that they would still drive after losing their license and then cause harm will result in an enhanced punishment appropriate to their carelessness. In addition, red light camera enforcement has been proven again and again to reduce fatal crashes at red lights and pedestrian deaths as well. And allowing communities to use this tool in dangerous intersections will have carryover effects and carryover benefits, as studies have shown consistently that drivers tend to run reds at non-camera locations less when other locations have cameras. As work from home options have increased, we are seeing more people able to forego hours of commuting and use more walking, biking, and other forms of alternative transportation. And as more roads are built with all users in mind, automobile, bicycle, pedestrian, scooter, etc., it is important that we do what we can to make those roads safe for all users. This legislation would make progress on that front, encouraging better spacing for passing on non-motor vehicle traffic and updating the crash reporting laws of the Commonwealth to ensure that all crashes are being submitted so that we can better understand and work to eliminate dangerous situations and locations. Finally, more than a year has passed since the distracted driving law went into effect last February. The more than 22,000 citations written in that time show that much work remains to be done. I am pleased that we have worked with our partners in safety to focus on and change this dangerous behavior. So thanks again for the opportunity to cover this critical legislation, and I believe now I'm turning it over to Jeff Larson from the Governor's Highway Safety Bureau. Thank you, Jeff.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and I want to thank EOPS Secretary Turco as well for allowing me to represent the agency. Before I start my written speech, I want to thank the administration, the Governor and Lieutenant Governor for the leadership that you have brought to highway safety over the last couple of years. I know, having spent a good portion of my career working in highway safety, it has been recognized and greatly appreciated by the folks who have been in the advocacy area where I was before. Far too many people die on the roads in Massachusetts, and preventing these tragedies is a priority for all of us, and those of us in EOPS and the Office of Grants and Research and the Highway Safety Division. These common sense proposals are critical to ensure that drivers and passengers and vulnerable road users like pedestrians and bicyclists can stay safe on their way to work, to school, on their day-to-day lives. And as we move out of the pandemic, there will be a shift in travel and transportation patterns as more people telework and choose travel in new ways and with different modes. These proposals here we're discussing today are important as we move through that transition. With regard to seatbelts, the seatbelt use rate, as the Secretary just mentioned, in Massachusetts is one of the lowest in the nation. We're at 46 out of the 50 states in this country, and that's unfortunate. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimates that seatbelts saved 60 lives in Massachusetts in 2018. An additional 45 lives can be saved in a single year if everyone were to be belted. Tragically, over half of the people who are killed on our roads in Massachusetts are unbelted, and these are entirely preventable tragedies. We know from national data that states with a primary seatbelt law have a seatbelt use rate that averages 10 to 12 points higher than states that have a secondary law, as we do in Massachusetts currently. This increase in Massachusetts seatbelt use rate, which will translate into saving, on average, 15 lives a year. In Massachusetts, about a quarter of our road fatalities are made up of vulnerable road users, bicyclists and pedestrians. From 2016 to 2020, there were 41 bicyclist fatalities, and during that same time, 359 pedestrians were killed on our roads. The 3-foot requirement in this bill will keep safe not only bicyclists, but pedestrians as well. And those pedestrians, by the way, includes police and fire personnel working on the side of the road, as well as workers for the DOT and local municipalities who are on the side of the road as well. The 3-foot requirement provides a clearly stated distance for safe passing means, and it will help drivers to reconsider and better understand the distance they need to keep from pedestrians and bicyclists and others. Regarding truck side guards and the convex mirrors and backup cameras, we know that this requirement will save lives. People have been and continue to be killed due to the inability of large truck drivers to see everything around them. These measures will prevent crashes. And then concerning the standardized crash reporting section in the bill, we in the Highway Safety Division, folks who are working on the state side, we need better data, so complete data for road incidents, so that we can understand what's happening on the road, where it's happening, and we can make better decisions about how to use our funds and to support highway road safety in the Commonwealth. So I want to thank you again for allowing me to speak here. I would now like to introduce Mark Kramer, who is an advocate for Haley's Law.
Good morning. Thank you for the kind words, Joe. Along with being the husband to my wife, Ivy, nothing provides me more pride and joy than being the father of my 2 daughters, Haley and Morgan. Nearly 7 years ago, on June 15th, 2014, on Father's Day, we suffered the unimaginable tragedy of losing Haley. Haley was killed while standing on the side of the road by a reckless driver. She was 20 and just entering the prime of her life. This was no random accident. This was preventable. The driver knowingly operated the vehicle on a non-administrative suspended license. Had this law we're discussing today been in effect on that day, Haley may very well be here with us today. She would have graduated from college, earned her doctorate in physical therapy, commenced her career dedicated to helping others, and perhaps even started her own family. This is why Ivy, Morgan, and I have worked tirelessly, along with the support of so many others, including Secretary Tessler, State Representative Ted Phillips, Majority Leader Claire Cronin, Brian Keyes and the Massachusetts Major City Police Chiefs to pass this bill into law and prevent other families from suffering such a devastating tragedy. I'd also like to take this opportunity to personally thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for filing this important piece of legislation and supporting our efforts to get this into law. The bill is simple, fundamentally fair, and absolutely necessary to help protect the safety of the public. Operators under our proposed bill who have had their license suspended or revoked for serious non-administrative driving offenses or who are unlicensed and knowingly climb behind the wheel are exhibiting a complete and blatant disregard for the laws of the Commonwealth and the safety of the community. These offenders need to know the consequences of their actions are going to be severe when they cause bodily injury, serious bodily injury, or death. There needs to be significantly stronger statutes with appropriately tiered penalties for those who knowingly and repeatedly flout the law and endanger others when they get behind the wheel. The promise of formidable penalties shapes behavior. If enacting penalties commensurate with the recklessness and negligence of this behavior prevents one crash, and it will, we will save another family, more likely many families, from the horror my wife, daughter, and I live with every day, and this reform will be a success. Driving a vehicle in Massachusetts is not a right, it's a privilege. The driver of the vehicle that killed Haley lost that privilege, yet continued to repeatedly get behind the wheel. There's urgent need for reform like this, targeting multiple and habitual offensive driving offenders. Let's do all we can to prevent another horrible loss by passing this crucial legislation. I'd like to introduce John Galvin from AAA.
Governor and Lieutenant Governor, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. Mark, thank you for your incredible courage and for your advocacy. You make a difference with what you do, so thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here, and we really applaud the Baker administration for filing this bill and for making traffic safety in the Commonwealth a priority. We're especially happy to see the bill proposes passage of a primary seatbelt in Massachusetts, which has been a top priority for AAA on our legislative agenda for many years. That's because we know primary seatbelts will save lives. In 2020, the preliminary numbers tell us that roughly half of those who died in motor vehicle crashes in Massachusetts were not wearing seatbelts, even though we know that seatbelts cut our risk of dying in a crash almost in half. In addition, you are 30 times more likely to be ejected from a vehicle when you don't buckle up. So we know that seatbelts are the most effective tool we have to prevent death and serious injury in a crash. Research shows that in DC and 34 other states that have passed primary seatbelt laws, compliance has surged by as much as 10%. According to the National Traffic Safety Administration, as mentioned earlier, if Massachusetts were to pass a primary seatbelt law based on a 10% increase in compliance, we would save 15 lives and prevent more than 500 life-altering injuries in a single year. And the primary seatbelt law not only saves lives and prevents injuries, but the Commonwealth has estimated that it would save over $110 million every year. Passage of a primary seatbelt bill would constitute a triple win, saving lives, preventing injuries, and saving precious dollars that could be allocated to more vital priorities. So thank you, Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito, for your commitment to road safety in the Commonwealth, and greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. AAA Northeast will do everything in our power to make sure this law is passed.
On-topic stuff for these folks?
Can you explain a little more about Haley's Law and what currently is in effect and how Haley's Law would improve on that?
Do you want to take a crack at that one, Mark?
Following Haley's death, when we filed our original legislation, I was appalled to learn that when your license is suspended, The only people who knew about it were the RMV and you as the suspendee, right? There was no notification anywhere else. And suspensions in Massachusetts are a large bucket. There's administrative suspensions and there's non-administrative suspensions. The non-administrative suspensions are the ones we're targeting. These are drivers that have been deemed to be a danger to the public, and their license has been suspended or revoked because of that, whether they're a multiple offender or other bad driving situations. So we got initial legislation enacted that would do that notification to the local police department, and as I said, with Secretary Tessler's help in the RMV, that's been enhanced to really be more real-time and get more information out to the police department. This part of the legislation is now to properly align penalties with the crimes. So in the case of the driver that killed Haley, his license had been suspended for a third time 3 days before he killed her, a non-administrative suspension, had many, many surchargeable incidences and was still driving. His punishment after being convicted at trial was the maximum under the statute at the time, which was 2.5 years, and it was a misdemeanor. This bill seeks to align the dangerous acts that people are doing to more of a felony type crime, where the punishments then align correctly with other statutes on the books in Massachusetts. We modeled it heavily after the OUI statute. We didn't want to chart new ground from a penalty perspective. So we've created 3 categories of this bill. If you drive OAS and you cause bodily injury, severe bodily injury or death, those are the 3 categories. And in each one, there's escalating penalties that goes from, fines and some jail time to extended jail time. Again, very much in line with similar statutes that are on the books in Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth, with the hope that it will be a deterrent for people to not drive when their licenses are suspended.
Governor, there had been, if you recall, reports around 2 years ago suggesting that the RMV had not been sending in a timely manner reports to police departments about troubled drivers. Does this also include provision to address that?
As Mr. Kramer just outlined, the original work that he and others had done is what you're referencing. The Section 62 notifications is what they're referred to. And last year, after a lot of work with our partners in public safety, those are going out real time right now to all the departments in the Commonwealth, police departments. So that is fully implemented. If someone is suspended for the reasons that Mark just laid out for a serious traffic offense, upon that notification overnight, those are notified to each cities and towns, each police department in the Commonwealth through a system that we worked out with public safety.
Governor, you mentioned trying to enforce some of the speed limits, but how do you plan to do that along, highways and actual roads? Do you plan to add tolls that can fine drivers, or maybe increasing patrols along those roads?
I didn't get the first part of that question. I'm sorry.
Just in terms of enforcing the speed limit, how do you plan to do that, and what will that look like under this bill?
I think the most important thing about enforcing speed limits is presence. So whether it's local law enforcement or state police, the big issue there is going to be about presence. I think it's important for people to, first of all, if we can get this law enacted, there are a number of elements that come with it that are important with respect to managing roadways generally. But I think the seatbelt issue is a critical issue with respect to saving lives. But obviously, from our point of view, the single biggest thing we can bring to the table on that, and our colleagues in local government can bring, is around presence.
Now, have you thought about adding tolls that can fine drivers for speeding? Is that something that you're considering at this point?
That's not in this bill, no.
Governor, on the resumption of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, can I get your reaction to that? Will it make a difference here in Massachusetts? And are you concerned about people thinking of J&J as a bad choice as opposed to Pfizer and Moderna? Perhaps there'll be some reluctance to use it.
I think the first thing I would say is that I think the I think the federal government, the CDC, and the FDA pursued what most experts would call a cautious approach on this. They had enough incidents to represent a 1 in a million with respect to the number of people who'd been vaccinated where they had issues with respect to blood clots and a negative reaction. And they paused it. We all paused it. They did a fair amount of work to determine both, the nature of the incidents that occurred, what happened as a result, whether or not they had all the cases that existed around the country, and then based on that, determined that the benefit of the vaccine was overwhelmingly positive, the number of cases was extremely rare, and that it would be important for that vaccine to be part of the sort of toolbox of vaccines that we make available to people here in Massachusetts. And I've said many times that I think if you have an opportunity to get vaccinated by one of these 3 vaccines, you should take it. I think for the most part, that will continue to be the way people respond to this. We don't have a lot of hesitancy in Massachusetts with respect to getting vaccinated. There were a couple of stories about people in other parts of the country not getting their second vaccine after they get the first. If they get Pfizer or Moderna here in Massachusetts, we're north of 99% of the population gets their second vaccine. Part of that's because we do everything we can to encourage providers to book that second appointment while people are still there having their waiting period after their first one. But I do think we will continue to make J&J available, especially to reach some of those harder to reach populations where the ease of use and the single dose can make a big difference for people.
Other states are closing vaccination sites because people aren't showing up, and yet the New England states are leading the nation in terms of accepting vaccine and using it. Why do you think that New Englanders are so on board with the vaccine?
I'm not exactly sure what's driving some of the behavior that's going on in other parts of the country. What I can tell you is that, we got hit very hard here early. If you look at the Northeast generally, because of primarily a lot of the traffic that have been coming in and out of the Northeast, in and out of New York, in and out of Boston, and that brought the virus here in many respects long before it got to other parts of the country, and before we knew very much about it, before we knew about asymptomatic transmission, before anybody had any serious PPE, and we got hit really hard. And I think for a lot of folks in the Northeast, that has stayed with us throughout the course of the pandemic and has a lot to do with why people have been so enthusiastic around the Northeast about getting vaccinated. I do think some of it has to do with how hard we got hit early on.
Yeah, there are reports that President Biden and the CDC are going to update mask guidance and make an announcement tomorrow. Do you know what that announcement might be? Do you have any plans to update the mask mandate here in the state?
I'm not familiar with what the feds may be up to. We have a call tomorrow morning with we have a weekly every Tuesday with the White House task force on COVID. If they are planning to make an announcement, I'm sure we'll learn something about it then. We do plan, said last week, that we're going to make some additional announcements here in Massachusetts this week.
Governor, with the,
Pardon me?
Could you give us a little bit more about what that announcement will be?
Stay tuned
Can you tell us when you'll expect to make that announcement?
this week.
When is it?
This week.
With the red light camera provision, you might know that there are also some studies that have suggested possibilities of racial profiling. What provisions will you include to either track that possibility of that happening or prevent that from happening in municipalities that opt in for this?
Well, first of all, it's an opt-in for municipalities if they choose to participate, and secondly, it's going to be driven off the ticket on the driver's on the license plate on the automobile. We can collect data based on that to determine whether or not it's being inappropriately used or being put in certain intersections and not in others. I think what we've heard from colleagues in municipal government is in intersections where they have lots of crashes, they would like to put this to work. And that's been the primary reason people have raised it with us at the local level. But we can collect a lot of data off that license plate to determine if, in fact, it's being used in inappropriate places.
How much of the Johnson & Johnson
Yeah.
And then will that shot be given out at any state-run sites?
So right now, we have about 6,000 doses. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Commonwealth broadly. Some of those are still with folks in the provider community, and we think we're going to get about 4,000 more this week. The vast majority of the places and spaces we've been using them in are primarily driven by mobile clinics, typically operated by community health centers or by hospitals, and they're being used in communities where we're trying to reach either homebound populations or going to a community center or something like that. I think it's likely that a big piece of them historically we've used, and remember, the vast majority, and I mean we have 3.5 million people in Massachusetts who've gotten one dose. We have 2.3 million people who are fully dosed. The vast majority of that, overwhelmingly vast majority, is Pfizer and Moderna. J&J has played a very small role here. But its ability, because of the fact you don't need the deep freeze, it's easier to prepare, you don't have to worry so much about spoilage and lost vaccine. They're very effective at helping with outreach programs or with physician offices that don't have the gear to do the deep freeze. And I think you're likely to see us continue to use primarily healthcare providers as the primary distributor, administrator of J&J.
Governor, are we at a point now where people really don't have to wait weeks anymore once they pre-register? I mean, we have enough supply where people are getting the vaccine pretty quickly?
I think it depends. It still depends to some extent on sort of where you are in the queue. But I think at this point in time, what I would say is that the retail pharmacy chain has grown dramatically since February. Okay, in February there were 50 retail pharmacy sites in Massachusetts. Now there's over 800. They have gone from being a very modest size player in this to being a very big player. And I know that a lot of people have gotten their appointments at pharmacies by getting up in the middle of the night and hitting refresh and getting that appointment. I can tell you point blank that the Lieutenant Governor, myself, and people on our team who are constantly checking to see what's going on with the pharmacy stuff, because it is such a big player in Massachusetts, there are now a lot of available appointments. When I say a lot, I don't mean like tens of thousands, but there are definitely available appointments there, and the process of getting an appointment there should be a lot easier than it's been before. We talk to our colleagues in the hospital community all the time because they've been a major player in our vaccination program since the beginning. And what they started to say to us last week is they have started to see more and more people who they reach out to schedule an appointment say, thanks a lot, but I got my first shot at X, or I got my vaccine at Y. So I really appreciate the outreach, but I'm good. So I do think we're getting to the point where people, for the most part, who are either pre-registered or have access through a pharmacy site or access through a clinician, should be able to get an appointment pretty quickly, and I would urge them to do so. One of the things we've said about these new variants several times is that these variants have been much tougher on younger people than some of the earlier strains of COVID. And the average age in our hospitals, as we've managed to vaccinate the vast majority of the people over the age of 65, and even at this point over the age of 55, we have started to see a lot more young people. And when I say young, it's all relative. People sort of in their 20s to 50s, okay, who are ending up in the hospital and are sick. And I think one of the things I don't want young people or younger people to walk away believing is that, this isn't about them, this isn't going to affect them. These new variants are clearly more troubling for younger people than some of the earlier strains of COVID. And I would urge everybody, because everybody over the age of 16 is now eligible to go get a vaccine, to sign up on the state's pre-registration site and get one that way, to pursue one through whoever your clinician is, to pursue one if you live where there's a regional collaborative, to go do that. But the important thing here is people should get vaccinated. And it's not just for your own good, it's for the good of your friends and your neighbors and your family. And in addition to that, it is going to show up ultimately in things like travel. Several countries have already started to say, if you're fully vaccinated, you can come to our countries. I fully expect we're going to see more of that, and probably some reciprocity between and among countries at some point. People should get vaccinated, and it's easier now than it was, and people should continue to do so.
Governor, with the solvency rate issue, have you heard any updates yet from the feds about what sort of unemployment insurance relief is available, or if you can use ARP funds to close the deficit in the trust fund?
We don't expect to hear, I mean, I can't give you a hard date on when we're going to hear from the feds. The date that most people think we are likely to hear from them is somewhere around the 10th of May. I mean, that's the date that governors and others have sort of heard from the feds as kind of the target date. We obviously are very interested in knowing what they have to say about that for just that reason.
So beyond the federal guidance, they haven't?
Yeah.
Okay.
Governor, on the swearing-in ceremony coming up in a little bit, can you just talk about the importance of that commission moving forward?
So Lieutenant Governor and I will be swearing in the members of the Post Commission, Police Officer Standards and Training Commission later today. The commission's work really kicks in statutorily on July 1st, but there's a ton to do to set this up. They need to hire an executive director. They need to bring on a general counsel. They're eventually going to have to build a pretty robust technology infrastructure to collect all the data that they need to collect from every municipal police department and from the state police, because they are going to be in the business of certifying, decertifying, and passing judgment on a variety of incidents that involve police officers pretty soon. The process for us on this began in conversations that we started having with the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus almost 2 years ago, which then led to working with them on the development, along with the folks in public safety, of legislation, which we originally planned to file right around the time the pandemic began. The pandemic happened. There were a whole series of horrible, awful tragedies and deaths, and which really raised the consciousness on this issue. And we filed right in the middle of that in this room with members of that caucus with us. And we thought it was important to begin with. It obviously became significantly more important that we get legislation done on accountability and transparency. The legislature worked this one over the summer and into the fall, and we eventually landed. We were one of maybe a handful of states that actually passed major legislation last year around training and accountability and transparency in law enforcement, and it got done. I would argue it got done in a way that reflected a lot of the hopes and aspirations of many of the people who protested and who marched, and many of the people who felt that this was long overdue. The people who are serving on this commission, we've heard overwhelmingly from folks since they've been announced that it's a very strong group of folks who represent a number of points of view and have the skill sets and the life experience and the professional experience to serve on this commission. I want to give Judge Hinkle especially a big shout out, because she agreed to chair this, which will be a really significant and important part of the role in all this going forward. But I think all of us have a lot of hope that this commission will be able to do the work that so many people believe needs to be done to improve the performance, the relationship, and the sense of fairness that needs to be associated with law enforcement generally here in Massachusetts.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming. Sorry to wake you up so early on a Monday.